G'day guys, today we're looking at the priest changes for Shadowlands and 9.0. I've tried a bit of a different video format for this one, so please let me know in the comments below what you guys think, and who knows, it could be the new format. Also, please do keep in mind that this is beta, so some of these things are subject to change, but this should give you a decent understanding of what the class looks like. There have been a lot of changes here, with Shadow pretty much having a complete rework, so with that being said, let's get into it. Let's start off with some changes that will affect all specs. So Fade will now reduce the range in which enemies will attack you. Power Word Fortitude will now increase stamina by 5% instead of 10%. We have a couple of new spells, so Mind Soothe will soothe the target, reducing the range in which it will attack you by 10 yards for 20 seconds. It only affects humanoid and dragonkin targets though, and it will not aggro the mob. I'll be keen to see where this is actually useful, maybe a Mythic Plus to avoid some packs instead of having to invis. I guess we'll have to wait and see. And Power Infusion is back, so for those of you who don't know, it will infuse the target, granting them 25% haste for 20 seconds every 2 minutes. It's a really big cooldown for either yourself or one of the friends in your group. That's it for the changes to the general specs, so not too much there, the main thing being Power Infusion. Looking at Disc, so let's get into it with Holy Nova. This will do reduced healing if there are more than 5 targets. Also, if your Holy Nova hits at least 3 targets, a second Holy Nova will be cast a moment later, doing 50% effectiveness. This will spread out the healing and make it a little bit less bursty, but we'll have to wait and see how the scaling goes with that as to how much AoE reduction it's actually going to give and whether or not the second cast is going to make up for it. So Rapture has had a little change as well. It now needs to be cast on a player. It has a 40-yard range and it will cost 3.1% of your mana, and doing so will shield the player instantly and apply Rapture to yourself with the exact same effects as before. They've also made it so that it lasts for 8 seconds down from 10 seconds, but with the initial shield that shouldn't affect how many shields you can get off by that much. Shadow Fiend has had a little bit of a change as well. It will now restore 1% of your mana whenever it attacks. This is quite nice given that a lot of spells have had their cost increased. Mind Blast has been added to the Disc kit, another damaging spell at last that we can use for atonement healing. This will most likely be a use on cooldown damage spell, so ensure you just have atonement up before doing so. Mind Seer has also now been added to Disc Priests. I really like them adding some variety in spells for discs to proc atonements. It was quite boring, the damage rotation before, and they really should spice things up, so this is really nice to see. Not to mention the lack of AoE that Disc had, so that should now be fixed with Mind Seer. Lastly, Shadow Word Death has also been added to Disc Priests, however this cannot proc Atonement. There is a legendary that will make it proc Atonement, but in its current form it only works on targets that are below 20% health, so I guess it will come down to scaling as to how much this spell gets used. That's it for the major changes to the disc. Let's have a look at some more minor ones. So Penance will now cost 1.6% of your mana, down from 2%. Smite will now cost 0.4%, down from 0.5%. And lastly, Shadow Mend will now cost 3.5% of mana, up from 3%. Let's have a look at talents now. So Luminous Barrier has been removed. I'm not too phased about this personally. I really like the placement of Barrier being a thing in this game, so removing the simple version that was just a raid-wide shield and was weaker anyway, it never really felt rewarding to choose this talent, so I'm okay with them removing this one. So Shadow Covenant has been completely reworked. Now it will heal 4 allies within 30 yards, the same as before, but it will now make your shadow spells deal 25% increased damage and healing, but it will lock you out from casting holy spells for 9 seconds. Really interesting what they're trying to do here. And lastly, Spirit Shell is the new talent in place of Luminous Barrier. It has a 1-minute cooldown. Will make it so that for 10 seconds your Penance, Power Word, Radiance and Atonements create absorb shields instead of healing. I wonder how raids are going to be tuned around this. Being able to preempt some big damage might make Disc a must-have for certain bosses. And that's pretty much it for the changes to Disc, guys. I really like what they're trying to do here by adding some damaging spells that can proc Atonement. It really adds some variety to the spec, and I think that was much needed to spice it up a bit. Alright, let's get into Holy. So let's start off with Circle of Healing. This was a talent in VFA, but it's now a baseline spell for Holy Priests. Other than that, the only real change outside of tuning is that it's going to cost 3.3% of mana, up from 2.5%. So Holy Fire, which used to be an instant cast, has now been changed and has a 1.5 second cast time instead of being instant. So Holy Nova, this is the first real change to the spec. It's the same as Disc and it will do reduced healing if there are more than 5 targets. Also now if Holy Nova hits at least 3 targets, a second Holy Nova will be cast a moment later at 50% effectiveness. Prayer of Mending will no longer have a cast time, instead now it will be an instant cast and have an 11-second cooldown. This will definitely help getting as many of those out on the raid as possible. It is also worth noting that Power Word Shield is now available for Holy, which will be really interesting to see how that falls into the meta. Holy Priests with shields, jeez. And next up we have Renew. It has had its instant healing removed, so it's now simply a heal over time. And Smite has had its base mana changed from 0.5% to 0.2%. However, it can no longer reset the cooldown of Holy Fire. So the use of this as a filler is probably going to go down a lot, especially with the addition of some more damage spells, which we'll get into in a second. Now let's move on to some more minor changes. First, we have Flash Heal. The mana cost has changed from 3% to 3.6%. Prayer of Healing will now cost 5%, up from 4.5%. And lastly, Heal will now cost 2.4%, up from 1.9%. It's also worth noting that Shadow Word Death has been added to Holy, and so has Shadow Word Pain. Interesting. And let's move on to talents. So Enduring Renewal has been removed, and so has Perseverance. And as we said earlier, Circle of Healing is now baseline, so obviously that talent has been removed as well. This leads the way for some new talents. So first up is Renewed Faith. This will increase the healing done to all targets with Renew on them. So with this, it would seem that you really want to throw Renew up on a target before dumping some heals into them, because that 10% will really add up. With the addition of Power Word Shield to Holy, we have now gained Body and Soul. So the same as the other specs, this will increase your movement speed by 40% to the target after using Power Word Shield or Leap of Faith on them. Afterlife has also had a slight change. It will now also increase the range of your healing spells, while in Spirit of Redemption by 30%. Binding Heal has had a simple mana cost change, here from 2.9% up to 3.4%. And lastly, Prayer Circle is another new talent. This will reduce the cast time of Prayer of Healing by 25% for 8 seconds every time you use Circle of Healing. So some really nice synergy there. And that's pretty much it for Holy changes, so there's really not too much there at all. I guess a few mana changes, the addition of a couple of damaging spells, so we'll see how all that pans out, and obviously with Circle of Healing now being baseline, but outside of that, it's pretty much the same. Alright, let's dive into Shadow. There is a lot to unwrap here, so let's start with the major changes to the spec. So Dark Thoughts is a new passive, so whenever you cast Mind Flay or Mind Seer on a target, you have a 3% chance per dot on the target to trigger Dark Thoughts. This will turn Mind Blast into an instant cast and give Mind Blast 1 additional charge. It will also allow you to cast Mind Blast while channeling Mind Seer or Mind Flay. So the next new spell we're going to have a look at is Devouring Plague. This is our new way to spend Insanity. In fact, it's our only way to spend Insanity outside of talents now after the Void Form rework, which we'll get to in a minute. It'll cost 50 Insanity and deal instant damage, as well as put a 6-second dot on the target. You'll also get healed for 50% of the damage dealt. The old Mastery, which simply increased the damage dealt, is no more. Instead, we have a brand new Mastery which is called Shadow Weaving. Instead of giving us flat damage increase to our spells, it will increase the amount of damage we do to the target for each dot we have on that target. So with Devouring Plague on top of Shadow Word Pain and Vampiric Touch, we have a total of 3 dots. I'd say that this mastery is pretty much a passive thing that you don't need to think about too much. The main thing would be that if you have some big damage coming out from a trinket or even a covenant ability, just to make sure that you have your dots up on the target before you use them. Also, while in Void form, you don't need to worry about any of this at all, because it will always grant you the maximum effect regardless of your dots. Let's move on to Shadowy Apparitions. So this passive has had a bit of an overhaul, so now whenever you deal damage with Mind Blast, Devouring Plague or Void Bolt, an apparition will appear and float towards all targets with Vampiric Touch on them and deal damage, which leads to a lot more apparitions and a lot more consistency with its spell, which is really nice to see and was something that was much needed for Shadow Priest overall. Also, if you crit with it, it will send 2 apparitions. I think that even this alone will probably make crit stay at the top of the priority list for Shadow Priest and Shadowlands. So let's look at Void Eruption. This was obviously the spell that put us into our Void form. It still functions the same way. When we use it, we go into our Void form and Void Eruption changes to Void Bolt, but it no longer requires 90 Insanity to use. Instead, it has a simple 90-second cooldown really simplifying this ability, which will add a lot of consistency to the spec. Use this button for big damage, nice and easy. So speaking of void form, as we now know, we can enter it every 90 seconds, but it has had some big changes too. We will no longer leave this form when we reach 0 insanity. Instead, it will simply last for 15 seconds, which again leads to more consistency. Starting to see a pattern yet? Blizz is really trying to make this spec more consistent. So because of that change, there's no longer a need to drain our insanity while in this form, so that's been removed, along with the haste bonus we got for the longer we stayed in the form, since it's now a flat 15 seconds. It also no longer reduces the cooldown of Mind Blast. So what does void form do if it doesn't give us insane haste and reduce our Mind Blast cooldown? Well, we still get our 20% increased spell power damage while in void form, but instead of having the Mind Blast cooldown reduced, we'll now gain 1 extra charge of Mind Blast that we can use. It'll also reset the cooldown of Mind Blast upon entering this form. To me, this has meant it's probably worth using Mind Blast right before popping Void Eruption and entering this form just to get as many Mind Blasts out as possible. I really like these changes overall. I think making your damage more reliable is a good thing, and removing some of that insane ramp up time that was required to deal damage by removing the insanity it's just a great change, and it will make Shadow much more desirable for things like Mythic Plus. So Shadow Word Death has had a bit of a change as well. It's no longer a talent, and it's now a baseline spell for all priests. It also no longer is an execute only spell, so you can use it on enemies regardless of their health. It does, however, deal 150% increased damage if the target is below 20% health. The charges have been removed as well, so we now only have one use, and its cooldown's been put up to 18 seconds. It will no longer generate any insanity. Additionally, if the target doesn't die from Shadow Word Death, you'll actually take the same damage that the spell dealt, so be sure not to snipe yourself with this spell. And lastly, Desperate Prayer, which is a defensive spell for Disc and Holy Priests, has now also become available for Shadow, which basically gives us an OG button. It will still function the same way, giving us 25% extra health and healing us for that amount. It's really nice to get some more survivability, making Shadow Priests even more viable for things like raids and Mythic Plus. It's good to see. And that's pretty much it for the major changes to Shadow Priests. Let's have a look at the minor ones. So Mind Blast will only generate 8 insanity now instead of 12. Mind Flayer is now a 4.5 second channel up from 3 seconds, and it will generate 18 insanity up from 12. Small change to Shadow Fiend as well. It will now only last for 10.5 seconds instead of 15. Also, Vampiric Touch now generates 5 insanity down from 6. And lastly, Void Bolt will generate 15 insanity down from 20. So let's move on to talents. A fair few talents have been removed from Shadow. First up is Shadowy Insight. This has been removed, but in a way it's been baked into the spec passively through the new Dark Thoughts passive. Shadow Word Void is no more. Dark Void has also been removed. As we know, Shadow Word Death is now baseline, so it's no longer a talent. Lingering Insanity has also been removed since Void Form no longer grants haste, there's no point for this ability. And so is Dark Ascension, making way for some new talents. First up is Death and Madness, a really neat new passive, which makes it so that if the target dies within 6 seconds of casting Shadow Word Death on it, you'll generate 1 insanity per second for 4 seconds, and it will reset the cooldown of Shadow Word Death. I can see this getting utilised in Mythic Plus to snipe off low health mobs, giving you crazy mob execute. Really nice. Next up is Unfurling Darkness. This is another passive. This makes it so that when you cast your Vampiric Touch, your next Vampiric Touch within 8 seconds will be an instant cast and deal bonus damage. This isn't chainable, however, as it does have a 15-second internal cooldown. Probably a good choice for multi-target encounters though, depending on tuning. Searing Nightmare is a new ability which actually costs 30 insanity. This is an AoE ability that will deal damage to all enemies around your target and spread Shadow Word Pain. If Shadow Word Pain is already on the target, it will deal increased damage. This is an instant cast, but it's only usable while casting Mindseer, but given you're probably casting Mindseer on AoE pulls anyway, it's not too big of a deal. So Psychic Link, it was a PvP talent in BFA, but now it's been moved into the standard talent tree with a bit of a buff. It'll make Mind Blast deal 50% of its damage to all targets with Vampiric Touch on them. Really cool AoE option here, depending on how tuning goes. It would be great to see this for multi-target encounters or Mythic Plus. Shadow Crash has had a bit of a change. It now has 3 charges, and its recharge has gone up to 41 seconds from 20 seconds, but it's had a bit of a buff in terms of single target potential. Now if it hits a single target, it will increase the damage that target takes from your next Shadow Crash within 15 seconds by 35%, and that stacks up to 2 times. So with 3 charges, you can dump all 3 charges in a row on a target to utilize this single target damage, which is a really nice change. Moving on to Damnation. This is a new ability that has a 45-second cooldown. It'll instantly apply your dots, so Vampiric Touch, Shadow Word Pain, and Devouring Plague, all free of cost. I can see this synergizing nicely with your Mastery, instantly getting the damage increase either on an opener or in situations where you need to swap to a new target. So Void Torrent has been tweaked a bit since it used to stop your sanity being drained, and that's no longer a thing. It will now refresh your dots on the target while you channel it. Another new talent is Ancient Madness. This is an easy one. It will give you 30% crit for 1.5 minutes whenever you activate Void Form. This will decrease by 2% every second. I assume the 1.5 minutes is a bit of a typo because 30% minus 2% every second is only 15 seconds, so presumably the tooltip is supposed to say for 15 seconds, which will make sense since that's how long Void Form lasts for. So Legacy of the Void pretty much brings it back to the old version of Void Form, removing its guaranteed duration and bringing the insanity drain back for entering Void Form, and you'll exit it when you reach 0 insanity. It'll now also increase the 1% haste every 2 seconds you're in Void Form, as well as refresh your Devouring Plague every time you cast a Void Bolt, as you don't really want to be spending insanity on Devouring Plague while in Void Form, so that is a nice change, but this talent is mainly for people who want to play the old Void Form. Nice addition though. And last of all, Surrender to Madness has been reworked. It now has a 1.5 minute cooldown, and on use it will activate Void Form and increase your insanity generation by 100%, as well as allow you to cast on the move for 25 seconds. It does, however, still have that hilarious factor of if a target does not die during this time, you indeed will die yourself. I love this ability and I'm glad that they've kept it. So with all those changes, what does the playstyle look like? Well, keeping it simple, ignoring the talents and cooldowns, the main core of the spec is going to consist around maintaining your Shadow Word Pain and Vampiric Dots on the target, using Shadow Word Death and Mind Blast on cooldown, using Mind Flay and Mind Seer as fillers to generate insanity, Mind Flay for single target and Mind Seer for AoE, and spending your insanity on Devouring Plague. And that's it for Shadow. All in all, a lot of great changes here. I think this spec is in a really nice place at the moment, and as long as they tune it correctly, it should turn out really fun for Shadowlands. Alright, so let's look at some PvP changes now. So for all pre-specs, we have a new talent called Thought Steal. It's a really interesting new talent. So this will attempt to steal a known spell from your target, taking the spell and causing the victim to not be able to cast that spell for 20 seconds. Also, if you do not manage to steal the spell, it will reset the cooldown of this ability. It can only be used on humanoids with mana, so that does take away a little bit of play there, but I'd love to see this happen on a pally bubble, for example, and be in an arena and they just panic when they can't have their immunity up. Some real fun things that you could play with there, but really interesting new spell there. Next, some talents have been removed, so Premonition for Disc has been removed. Divine Attendant for Holy has been removed. Rapid Mending has also been removed for Holy. And Cardinal Mending is a new option for Holy. Cardinal Mending will make it so that your Prayer of Mending will always heal 10% of your target's health regardless of any healing reductions. I wonder if this will work with Dampening. And Divine Ascension is another new talent. It will put you up into the air and make you safe, similar to the Demon Hunter's Death from Above. However, while you're in the air, you can only cast holy spells, so really interesting there. Greater Heal has had a bit of a change as well. It's now on a 15-second cooldown, so you can't just spam that. A few more spells have been removed, so Psychic Link for Shadow has been removed since obviously Psychic Link is now a talent for Shadow. Edge of Insanity has also been removed, and so has Shadow Mania. Lasting Plague is a new spell. It will simply increase the duration of Devouring Plague by 6 seconds. Nice and easy. And lastly, Driven to Madness will no longer grant 9 insanity over 3 seconds. Instead, it will reduce the cooldown of Void Eruption by 3 seconds every time you're attacked. I guess Blizzard doesn't want us to focus Shadow Priest in PvP. And that's it for PvP changes. Personally, I'm really excited to see how the new Shadow changes work out in Arena. And Divine Ascension is a really interesting new spell, which I'd like to see how many people pick it. So, as everybody knows, there are 4 covenants. There's Kyrian, Night Fae, Venthyr, and Necrolord. When you choose your covenant, you'll gain access to 2 spells. One is a covenant-wide ability, and one is a class-wide ability. So, let's start with Kyrian. The covenant-wide ability is Summon Steward. This will call forth a steward that will bring you a Phial of Serenity that can be consumed to restore 20% of your health and remove all curses, diseases, poisons, and bleed effects. You can also use your steward to change talents and sell some items. So the class-wide ability is called Boon of the Ascended. This is a 3-minute cooldown which will give you the buff Boon of the Ascended for 10 seconds. For Shadow, while this is active, your Mind Flay will be replaced, and for Disc and Holy, your Smite will be replaced with Ascended Blast. This is an instant cast with a 2.8 second cooldown. Each time you cast Ascended Blast, you'll gain 5 stacks of Boon of the Ascended buff. When the buff expires, it will explode, dealing damage to all enemies around you and healing friendlies around you based upon the amount of stacks that you have. This is a really cool ability, and I like the idea of getting as many stacks as you can before the buff expires, which currently looks like 21 stacks, so 4 casts of Ascended Blast. You'll also gain 50% movement speed while this buff is active. Looking at Night Fae now, the covenant-wide ability is Soul Shape. This will turn you into a Vulpin, teleporting you forward 15 yards and increasing your movement speed by 50%. While in this form, you can reactivate this ability every 4 seconds to blink forward another 15 yards. It will last for 12 seconds or indefinitely while in a rested area. The class-wide ability is Fae Guardians. This is a 1.5 minute cooldown that will enhance some of your spells. It will make the damage you deal directly to targets with Shadow Word Pain on them restore 0.5% of your base mana, or 3 insanity per attack. It'll make the targets you cast Power Word Shield on take 10% reduced damage, and make the Flash Heal or Shadow Mend increase the cooldown recovery rate of a major ability by 100%. This is a really interesting and unique Covenant ability. The cooldown recovery is what stands out to me. I'll be really interested to see how it chooses what cooldown it reduces and how that can be used in raids. For Venthyr, the Covenant-wide ability is Door of Shadows. This is simply a teleport that allows you to appear at your targeted location once every minute. Really interesting one here for the class-wide ability. It's called Mind Games. This is a 45-second cooldown, and it puts a 5-second debuff on the target, making their damaging spells heal the target instead, and their healing spells damage the target instead. Also, if a spell is reversed, it can generate us up to either 4% mana or 20 insanity. This is something that I can imagine being very strong in Arena, especially in the lower ratings, either throwing it on a healer using it as a 5-second CC so they can't heal, or making them assist you in killing the target by healing them to death, or defensively when a player pops their cooldowns, they can blast you back to life. This could turn out to be my favourite Covenant ability yet. Lastly, Necrolord. The Covenant-wide ability is Fleshcraft. This is a 2-minute cooldown that has a 4-second cast that puts a shield on you that absorbs damage equal to 20% of your maximum health for 2 minutes. If it's cast near a corpse, you'll gain a stronger shield equal to 50% of your maximum health. The class-wide ability is Unholy Nova. It's a bit more tame than the rest of the Covenants. It's on a 1-minute cooldown, and it will let out an AoE damaging and healing ability that heals up to 6 allies around you and debuffs all enemies within 15 yards with Unholy Transfusion. This is a 15-second debuff that heals all allies who attack this target. Depending on tuning, this could become a super overpowered raid-wide heal. I would love to see how much healing this does if you stack 4 priests with this to give your target 100% uptime with this debuff. And that's pretty much it for the chains we could find. If you'd like to download any of the class recalls we use in this video, we'll provide a link down below. You can check me out on Twitch for more Shadowlands content. I'll put a link down there as well. Thanks heaps for watching. See you later.